Geoffrey Pyatt, Senior Managing Director, McClarty Associates, former US Assistant Secretary of State for Energy Resources, former US Ambassador to Ukraine and Greece, Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council. What a great panel we have. Geoffrey Pyatt, over to you.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you to The Economist for having me back. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm going to be very brief. I want to start with the point that my dear friend, Commissioner Avramopoulos, made about the geopolitical salience of energy issues. Just to share, I spent all of last week in Houston, the energy capital of the world, at an event called CERAWeek, which is sort of the World Cup of energy geopolitics. And I had the opportunity there to speak with the CEOs and presidents of the biggest companies in the world. There was one single most important takeaway, that the long-term repercussions of the crisis in the Gulf are going to linger much, much longer than markets are currently pricing in. That is to say, the tail effect of taking Qatar Energy offline, of discovering that Iran can control the Straits of Hormuz, and the loss of confidence in the region's stability as a supplier of about a fifth of global volumes is going to have lasting and enduring effects. It's going to have a price impact on all of our economies, and it is also, in the longer term, going to accelerate the transition that is underway here in Europe. That brings me to the second point that I want to make. It's a tremendous pleasure to be back here in Romania, a country that I visited frequently when I was in government, precisely because Romania encapsulates what a smart energy security strategy looks like. This is a country that has pursued all of the above, that has one of Europe's most mature civil nuclear sectors, with Europe's largest gas reserves, a country that's moving ahead with offshore wind, and I was delighted to work with Minister Popescu and Minister Barduja on that effort, a country that has massively expanded its capacity in solar and battery storage, and a country with tremendous hydropower capacity. That's exactly the approach that we all need to be taking in the United States, in Europe, and beyond. And indeed, I think the major takeaway that global energy markets will have from the past month of crisis in the Gulf is diversity in all things. Diversity of energy sources, diversity of energy routes, diversity of energy carriers. Because the countries that are most disadvantaged by this current crisis are those which have placed all of their eggs in a single basket. And then the last point I want to make relates to Romania's neighbor, Ukraine. I've spent a lot of time, both in government and now out, working on issues around Ukraine and Ukraine recovery. There will be a day after. What I want to underline for this audience, especially as we're sitting here in Bucharest, is the understanding that when the war in Ukraine comes to an end, and it will come to an end, the center of European geopolitics will have moved decisively to the south and the east. Romania, the Black Sea region, will be even more important in the context of NATO security, but also in the context of Ukraine's post-war economic recovery. I spent a lot of time in Houston talking about the opportunities represented by Ukraine reconstruction, and especially in the energy sector. I think Romanian companies, Turkish companies, will be particularly advantaged when that reconstruction process begins, because the war is going to end with the Ukrainian people decisively committed to their future in Europe, their future as members of the European Union, and their most important support is going to come from the European neighbors, the EU member state neighbors, who have gone down the same road of transforming a Soviet culture system into a European one. And I think it's important that you already see key companies from Southeastern Europe. I've been working, for instance, with PPC, Greece's public power company, on their role in Ukraine, but also that Ukrainian companies, for instance, here in Romania, are starting to expand. So I work closely with DTEC, Ukraine's largest private energy company, which is also now a major investor in solar capacity and battery storage here in Romania. And its parent company, SCM, is a major investor into steel production. So I think as we get into this process of reconstruction in Ukraine, and as the war comes to an end, it's clear that Europe, European institutions, Brussels is going to have to carry the football. But I also think, as Prime Minister Rama talked about this morning, that we should view this not as a challenge, but as an opportunity. So amid a moment of profound geopolitical dislocation, more so in the Gulf than any place else in the world, I think we also need to recognize the opportunities, and in particular the progress that companies like the ones represented in this room today have been helping us to make.
Thank you very much indeed. So in terms of questions, maybe I can start with you actually, because in a way you're the outsider here from across the across the oceans, because all our other three speakers emphasize very much that in this kind of it's not a new world order, it's some kind of interregnum. You know, the old order is gone, and we need to get used to that. So we're in this era of uncertainty, unpredictability, instability, great power rivalry and competition. That's where we are. They emphasized an exposure to war and conflict. In that situation, they very much emphasize the importance of cooperation in their different ways, regional cooperation. Also emphasize that there's some fragmentation there. There are lots of institutions in the region involved in different aspects of connectivity and regional cooperation. From an outsider's point of view, do you think that there could be some form of regional cooperation that doesn't now exist that would help? Or do you think that it's actually going to come much more from the private sector, from things that are just happening already in terms of infrastructure projects, energy projects from the private sector, from the business side? Or should there be something from the kind of more political, institutional side?
Thank you for the question, Joan. And let me answer it both vis-a-vis the immediate region, the Black Sea, and this Balkan region, but also in terms of transatlantic. And I think on the transatlantic side, it's clear that at least for the next couple of years, it's companies in the private sector that are going to have to carry the water, as it were, to preserve the bilateral relationship. But I also know from the companies that I work with in the United States, they remain deeply committed to their work here in Europe, in Turkey. These are companies that do billions of dollars of business every year. And likewise, we still have European companies as some of the biggest investors in the United States. I was with the leadership of Repsol, for instance, which has made a huge contribution, huge investments in the U.S. energy generation sector at a moment when we're navigating exactly the same challenges that Europe is navigating: skyrocketing demand, need to expand grid and transmission. In terms of the region, and I was the head of U.S. delegation for the 3C summit in Vilnius. I was here in Bucharest when Romania chaired the 3Cs. I am a deep believer in these institutional arrangements. I also think we need to stop having summit meetings with declarations and focus on business and private sector relationships. To take an example that I have been deeply involved with, and I have some of my Greek friends here who've been involved with work around the vertical corridor, the Alexandroupoli gas terminal. All of these projects hinge not on the actions of government, but on private companies working together to build grid infrastructure, to build gas transmission capacity, to build fiber and data connectivity, and to build the patterns of commerce that leverage the opportunities from a region which is at the core of Europe, but also provides connectivity to Asia, to North Africa, to the Eastern Mediterranean. So I think the government can play a role as an enabler, providing a clear diplomatic signal of support. That's what the Biden administration tried to do as we came in as observers to the 3Cs, for instance. Same with PTEC, which the Trump administration has also continued on. Government can help with de-risking the work done by our institutions. Our Development Finance Corporation, one of its largest projects in the world, is a wind power project in Turkey. But ultimately, this is about private companies finding commercial opportunity and building the business relationships that make that happen.